The land still smelled of rain, the kind that turns the soil soft and heavy, the kind that leaves behind silence too deep for comfort. Fences lay broken like old bones, roofs torn open to the gray sky. The storm had passed, but what it left behind looked more like a battlefield than a home. In the middle of it all stood Martha Boone, her frail hands steady on a broken plank, trying to lift what her husband Silas could barely hold. Their daughter Annie, her hair plastered to her face, worked quietly beside them. Her dress was soaked through, but her eyes, those stayed fierce. She was young still, maybe 30, but had the tired look of someone who'd been fighting the world too long. No one from town came to help. They just watched from their porches, whispering behind their mugs of coffee, saying it was foolish for the Boones to rebuild. Some folks don't know when to quit, someone said. And from the ridge above, watching them through a curtain of dying rain, sat Elias McGraw, the richest rancher in 3 counties. He was a tall man with a quiet kind of hardness about him. His hat shadowed his face, but the eyes beneath it had seen too many storms, outside and in. He watched the Boones lift board after board, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to stop. Then he turned his horse and rode away, leaving only the sound of hooves fading into the wind. The narrator's voice, old, worn, full of dust and memory, seems to drift in. Some storms don't end when the clouds part. Some keep blowing inside a man long after the thunder's gone. By the next morning, the storm had become a story. Folks in Red Hollow liked stories, especially when they weren't their own. In the saloon, the men sat around whiskey and gossip. "Boones are rebuildin'," one said, spitting into a tin cup. "After all that, they're crazier than a kick mule." Another nodded. "They'll lose it all again next storm. Some people just don't learn." In the corner, Sheriff Lyle Parker looked over at Elias, who sat drinking alone, his expression unreadable. "They could use a few hands," the sheriff said. "Storm hit 'em bad." Elias didn't look up. "Storm hit everyone, Sheriff. They'll manage." His voice was flat, but something behind it flickered. Something old and unhealed. That night, lying in his big empty house, Elias couldn't sleep. The rain tapped at his window, and he remembered Martha Boone, her laugh, her eyes, the way she used to look at him before she married Silas all those years ago. He turned over, the memory cutting through him sharper than the wind ever could. Days passed. The Boones kept building. Each sunrise found them at it again, their hands raw, their backs bent, their faith tested. Annie never complained, not once. She just worked quietly, like she was holding something sacred together. Then one morning, they found it, a pile of new lumber stacked by the barn. No footprints, no note. Just clean, straight wood, enough to finish the walls. Silas stood staring at it, his weathered face full of disbelief. "Must be from the Lord," he said softly. Martha smiled faintly. Maybe he sent someone with deep pockets and a guilty heart. She looked toward the ridge. Up there, unseen, Elias McGraw sat on his horse, watching them work with the lumber he'd left. He said nothing. The narrator's voice returns low and thoughtful. "Some men give not for forgiveness, but because guilt weighs heavier than gold." That night, the Boones lit a fire. Annie hummed an old song while her parents rested, and her voice carried through the quiet plains. Far away, on his porch, Elias sat in the dark, listening. He didn't understand why that sound made him feel something like peace. But peace never stays long in the West. Another storm came. Not as big, not as wild, but crueler somehow. The wind tore at what little they'd rebuilt. Silas Boone ran outside to hold the roof down himself. The rain was cold, sharp, blinding. When it was over, the barn was in ruins again, and Silas was lying in the mud, his breath shallow, his hands clutching the earth. Word reached the town by morning. In the saloon, someone laughed. Old fool tried to fight the wind again. The laughter was short-lived. Elias stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. He set his glass down and said, low and dangerous, "You ever mock a man who builds with his own hands again, you'll answer to me." The room went dead quiet. No one spoke as he walked out, his boots echoing like thunder. He rode hard toward the Boone ranch. When he arrived, the sky was still heavy, the air thick with a smell of wet dirt. Annie was on her knees in the mud, trying to lift a fallen beam. Martha sat beside Silas, holding his head in her lap, her face streaked with tears and rain. Elias dismounted, dropped to his knees beside Annie, and lifted the wood without a word. Martha looked up at him in shock. "Elias," she whispered, "why are you here?" He didn't look at her. "Because I should have been," he said quietly. Behind him, the sheriff and a few townsmen who'd followed stood uncertain, watching. Elias turned to them, his voice sharp as a whip. "All stop now." Everyone froze. The wind held its breath. Elias looked around at the wreckage, then pointed to the barn. "We start again. Together." For a moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Parker stepped forward, grabbed a hammer, and began to work. One by one, others joined. The air filled with the sound of nails striking wood, boots shuffling through mud, and hammers singing redemption. The Boone's barn began to rise again, not from pity, but from something deeper, something long missing in Red Hollow. Elias worked beside Annie, his sleeves rolled, his hands blistering. They didn't speak much. Their silence said everything. The weight of pride, the cost of loneliness, the quiet grace of trying again. Once, as they lifted a beam, their hands brushed. Just a second. But it was enough. It wasn't love yet. It was something like respect, maybe forgiveness, taking its first breath. When the barn stood tall again, the last nail driven, Elias took off his hat and wiped his brow. Silas, pale but smiling weakly, watched from the porch. Martha stood beside him, eyes shining with tears. "Didn't think I'd see this day again," she said softly. Elias looked at her, voice low. "Neither did I." The wind moved between them, gentle now, like it too was tired of being angry. The narrator's voice came back warm and worn. "Sometimes redemption don't come with forgiveness. Sometimes it's just a hand that finally learns to hold again." Elias looked at the barn, at the people who once whispered against him. The sky was turning gold now, the storm long gone. He said quietly, "The storm's done now. Time we stop letting it own us." Martha nodded. Annie met his eyes for a long moment, and though no words passed, something in that silence promised a peace both of them had been searching for. That night, under a clean sky full of stars, the new barn glowed like a lantern on the plains. The land was still scarred, but it breathed again. The narrator's voice softened to a whisper. "Out here, storms come and go. But the real ones, they stay inside you until you find the courage to rebuild. Maybe it ain't about what the wind takes, but about who shows up when the sky clears. Maybe grace ain't loud. Maybe it's a man lifting a beam beside folks he once turned away." Elias rode off slow that night, his horse moving through silver grass, the moon trailing him like an old friend. He didn't look back, because he didn't have to. The barn stood strong. The family he once turned from now stood taller than the storm that broke them. For the first time in years, Elias McGraw's heart felt lighter than the saddle on his back. The voice fades one last time, like the closing of a prayer. That day, the richest man in 3 counties learned what wealth truly was, not in the land he owned, but in the hearts he helped mend. The camera would fade to black, the wind whispering through the prairie, carrying the sound of hammers and forgiveness far into the dusk. If this story touched you, remember, sometimes all it takes to stop the storm is to say, "I'll stop now." Like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Myths. Hit the bell icon and leave your thoughts in the comments below. More stories of grace, redemption, and the wild American soul await you on Frontier Myths.